concept that breakfast food should be dessert is an invention of the food industry. We don't need that. It's only harming us. So savory first meal of the day, built around lots of protein, that's going to keep your glucose levels nice and steady.
Do you ever think about resistant starch when you're having the breakfast? Can you mention about that as a strategy?
Absolutely. You can have resistant starch. You can even add, some vegetables in there to just get the fiber. And if you want to have a simple piece of bread, for example, or some potatoes, which is just regular starch, you can, but it should be there for taste, right? It should never be the center of your breakfast. It should be there for pleasure, for taste, but not as the main character. And something cool about resistant starch, while we're on the topic, there's some really cool studies that show that when you heat starch up and then you cool it down overnight or in the fridge, some of the starch in the food, let's say in some pasta, will turn into resistant starch. So you're essentially lowering the glucose impact of a starch by heating it up and cooling it down and then eating it later on. That's so amazing.
And do you see that? Do you see that in your own body?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so what I do is I find these studies that are really interesting and then I test them on my own glucose levels to produce sort of an illustration of those scientific studies so that people can get the message from the studies in a very visual, easy way. That's the goal.
Which you do a wonderful job at doing that. And just for the listener, the resistant starch, these are molecules that do exactly that. They resist digestion and they function kind of like a fiber. That's one way you can think about it as opposed to just straight white bread, etc. It becomes more fiber-esque in the body.
And it acts like fiber. So you can end up with some pasta that has way more fiber than it originally would have if you had just eaten it straight there. But that's like a little side quest hack, right? We don't have to do that for every single starch that we eat. So that was the first one, savory breakfast. The second one, which is very important, has to do with vegetables. So when we eat vegetables at the beginning of a meal, and this is key, at the beginning of a meal, the fiber in the vegetables has time to go and coat the walls of our upper intestine, creating a protective mesh in our upper intestine that stays in place for a few hours. And this mesh helps reduce how quickly glucose molecules from the rest of the meal are going to make their way into your bloodstream. So you're slowing down the arrival of glucose molecules into your blood by having what I call a veggie starter. So before lunch or before dinner, start your meal with a plate of vegetables. It can be anything from roasted broccoli with tahini to some raw carrots to salad, to whatever you want. A veggie starter. Take advantage of that fiber in your veggies to reduce the spike of the rest of the meal. And after the veggie starter, eat whatever you want, right? You just add this plate. And it's interesting because in so many cultures, we see this as a habit. So in France, where I'm from, we have this concept of crudité, which is kind of like an old school thing our grandparents used to do, which is raw veggies at the beginning of a meal. In Italy, antipasti is usually built around vegetables. So we've known for a long time that these habits make a lot of sense. And only recently do we have the science and the glucose evidence to back it all up. It's really cool.
I hadn't thought about that. That's absolutely correct. Does it matter what kind of fiber, whether it's soluble, insoluble? Do you care, or do you just say, listen, friends?
I don't care. I mean, this is my philosophy, right? I'm just like any veggies. Just find veggies that you want, even if it's just salad that actually doesn't have that much fiber in it. But even if you just want a little bit of salad, or if you want to go, the full 9 yards and make a beautiful roasted dish of lots of different veggies, go for the veggies. That's the most important part.
And so the first hack is eat a savory breakfast with protein. The second hack is to pre-game your meal with fiber. What's the third?
Exactly. Okay, the third one has to do with vinegar. And I spent most of my time reading scientific studies. And when I first came across the scientific studies on vinegar and glucose levels, I almost fell off my chair.
When was that? When did you?
I could not believe it. It was about 4 or 5 years ago. And I really couldn't believe it. So it turns out that vinegar contains a molecule called acetic acid. And when we have a tablespoon of vinegar in some water before eating carbs, this can reduce the glucose spike of our carbs by up to 30%. just by adding this vinegar drink before eating them. And the reason for this is because acetic acid slows down the enzymes in charge of breaking down carbs into glucose molecules. So the acetic acid slows down how quickly the glucose from the carbs arrives into your bloodstream. Once again, it's all about velocity, right? And slowing down that glucose so it doesn't spike so high. And again, Gabby, like everybody has vinegar in their kitchen. It is an ingredient that's been around for centuries. And in the Middle East, in Iran, for example, they have apple cider vinegar every single day. It's known to be a health ingredient, but only recently have we started to uncover what's really going on a chemical level. So these are not rocket science. They're kind of common sense, but actually we need to bring them back because we've lost touch with all of them.